Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Around the Empire is independent media, the cost of productions offset by supporters. Your contributions are very much appreciated and needed. You can pitch in by going to patreon.com/aroundtheempire or at paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. You can find all of these links at our website, aroundtheempire.com. In this two-part series, investigative journalist Mohamed Elmaazi joins us from London. Mohamed has been working on what's potentially one of the most explosive international scandals in recent years. Hacked documents have exposed a secretive quote-unquote charity think tank, the Institute for Statecraft, which is funded by the British Foreign Office, the US State Department, NATO, Facebook, a neoconservative foundation, and others. Mohamed located their London office in a neo-Gothic mansion, 2 Temple Place, and later accompanied a British MP on an unwelcome visit. One of the Institute for Statecraft's projects, the Integrity Initiative, possibly a front for military intelligence, is a covert propaganda network of politicians, journalists, academics, researchers, and military officers engaged in smearing political leaders and interfering in the affairs of other allied governments. Mohamed Elmaazi is a journalist with experience in human rights law, with degrees from American University in Cairo and SOAS. He contributes to Open Democracy, The Canary, The Gray Zone, and the Real News Network. Follow Mohamed on Twitter at MELMAAZI, Elmaazi. We recorded this interview on December 22nd, 2018. And this is part 1. Mohamed Elmaazi, welcome to Around the Empire. It's great to have you.
Thank you. It's good to be on here.
So you have picked up on a very big story that I'd like to talk to you about today. And if we could sort of lay it out for our listeners, I'd like to do that. And just sort of with a timeline, start out with a little timeline. On November 5th, Anonymous Europe leaked some hacked documents onto a website called CyberGorilla. And a couple of weeks later, I noticed that you and Max Blumenthal were looking at these documents. And so I started paying attention to that. And we talked briefly about it at that point, because what brought to my attention was that WikiLeaks initially doubted the integrity of some of these documents, but that was quickly cleared up when an organization called Integrity Initiative confirmed that, yeah, they were their documents. And from there, we found that this was a major influence propaganda operation that went sort of almost all the way up to the top of the British government, funded by what's the name of the office that funds it? The FCO. What is that? The Foreign and Commonwealth Office?
Correct.
And this is the office that oversees GCHQ. GCHQ is the surveillance. It's the equivalent of the NSA here.
That's correct. And
also that in that same compartment of British government is MI6, which is the equivalent to our CIA. And immediately the Integrity Initiative started to try to, I think their first reaction was they started to try to play down what this operation was. Is that true?
Well, so the interesting thing is, so the Integrity Initiative is itself a project of a think tank called the Institute for Statecraft. And this think tank is made up of many of the same people who then go on to found the Integrity Initiative. So the Institute for Statecraft essentially applies for funding to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office saying, hey, you've got a budget for countering Russian disinformation or countering disinformation, and we'd like to get in on that. and here's this program. It's called the Integrity Initiative, and this is what we'll do. Will you fund us? So, but the Integrity Initiative, they've got their own sort of website, you're right. And I myself, and I was speaking with Max about this, I was about 50-50 with the documents. It's like, okay, there seems to be legit documents here. But, propaganda, good propaganda, mixes truth with lies, right? Mixes legitimate documents with illegitimate documents. And then on the 25th of November, which is soon after we became aware of the existence of the documents. So you cited the 5th of November they were posted, but it wasn't on the 5th of November that the public were made aware of the documents, right? I think it was closer to like the end of November, wasn't it?
Yeah, I wondered what happened during that period of time, because I assume they were leaked because remember the 5th of November, it's a significant date in Britain, as everybody now knows from the movie
V for Vendetta. Yeah. Well, now it's mostly a reason just for fireworks. Most people aren't generally, literally celebrating the burning of a Catholic, although that is where it goes back to.
Yeah.
Right? Who tried to blow up Parliament, not just because he was Catholic. Now people just use it as an excuse to set off fireworks. There's massive fireworks that are unleashed on the 5th of November. What happens is they uploaded the documents, but if you're not aware, like I can upload a video on YouTube, but if I don't go sharing the video, then, months can go by and not a single person will see it because you're just not aware of the link, right? It's not like you're searching for my video. So it's the same thing. They've uploaded these documents on the 5th of November, but I don't think they really announced it till about the 25th or around there, maybe a bit before. And so that's when I become aware of it. And then on the 25th of November, which I think was a Sunday, the Integrity Initiative released a statement, a public statement. So I'm like half-half. I'm like, well, and so is Max. So like, this could still be some cutaway from the Russian government, right? It could be that, right? It's
right.
At no point did we doubt that there could be state involvement of like, okay, let's expose this organization's documents.
Yeah, I actually talked to you during that time, so I know that you were completely open-minded as to,
Yeah. And I thought, and then on a statement dated the 26th of November, but it was released on the 25th. A headline, something about Russian hack, right? Russians have hacked us, although they haven't provided any evidence for this. They basically come out saying, oh yeah, this is us, right? Like, we are the Integrity Initiative. Many of our documents have been stolen, and we say by Russians. We haven't been through all of the documents, so we can't say that none of them are forgeries. So that's how they cover their backside, which, is a fair statement they're supposed to make. And they basically say, we're here to counter Russian malign influence, and this is just an example of Russian malign behavior. And hybrid warfare, it's a term they're constantly using to describe what Russia does. Russia is engaged in hybrid warfare, so we too need to catch up, because we're behind them. And we need to catch up, and we need to also counter their hybrid warfare with our hybrid warfare in order to defend liberal democracy and the rule of law. And if you read their documents, I've spent hours reading through their stuff. That is literally the background that they're coming from. That I think many of them genuinely believe. I can't say about all of them, but many.
Yeah, we
of them
can relate to that. We can relate to that here for sure.
Right, but it is a thing, and there is all kind of a mix between here and people in Europe and the United States, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they came out and they released a statement. So I was like, great, okay, they've released a statement saying, yeah, they could have been much more vague about it, but they tried to. I suppose there's multiple ways you can go about it, and they could say, look, we don't know how many documents of ours they've got. They'll probably be releasing more. We might as well just come out and say, yeah, this is us, and we defend what we're doing. This is a legitimate institution, rather than try to duck and dive and say, this has nothing to do with us, because then we'll just be caught out for completely lying. So that makes sense.
So before we move on, can we just address, do we have any idea who Anonymous Europe is?
I don't. I haven't looked any further into that.
Right.
And I'm not sure. Max might be doing more on that side. I'll be finding out from him. But I literally haven't. So my position still is it could be just a group of, hacktivists, just like Anonymous, the rest of Anonymous. It could be they're connected to a foreign state like Russia. It could be a mixture of the two, because groups can be infiltrated, right?
Right,
So
exactly.
that happens all the time, right? Where states will infiltrate groups, whether it's CIA or MI6 or Israelis or Saudis or the Russians will infiltrate groups to police do it here in this country all the time. That's a separate conversation. But
Yeah.
I've written about undercover policing, political policing, we call it. They infiltrate legitimate, democratically organized, constructed organizations that are anti-war or about healthcare, what have you. And literally, they'll sleep with activists, they'll father children, and then it turns out they're police officers.
Oh
So
yeah.
if
That's
they do
we
that,
commonplace here as well. I mean, we have we have police or government organizations that infiltrated the Quakers. So
right? Yeah. And Quakers are big on peace, right? It's the same
oh
here.
yeah,
They're at the front lines here actually with research and with activism. They're very good. On Yemen as well, the people who are leading the charge, a lot of the direct actions are Quakers here who will infiltrate the drone facilities where drones are manufactured and other things, and who've been prosecuted. Lots of them are Quakers. People don't know this always from the news, but lots of the people who do this here are Quakers, as they are in the States.
yeah. The
So
Quakers
it's
are strong in Philadelphia, where I live very close to Philadelphia, so
yeah,
been
yeah,
familiar with them for a while. So yeah, and I guess the important thing in my view is, although I'm always going to keep in mind the source because
of
they
course.
may be selective in what they leak, but the important thing for me is that the documents are legitimate. So
Yeah, yeah. So, and it doesn't mean though that every single name that is written in every document that person is consciously like with these people. It could be that there are some documents with people's names and email addresses on them, but that's because somebody has been to an event and signed his name and address, or somebody else has said, "Oh, so and so would be interested in the work we're doing. Put down his name." So that's something to remember when we're discussing this. And when people look through documents, people shouldn't jump to the conclusion that absolutely every single name in these documents are people who are directly involved knowingly with this group of people. They may be sympathetic and ideologically aligned with their objectives, but it doesn't mean they're knowingly working with this organization. So
right.
I know this because I've contacted journalists who have said, like, "Hi, you're on these people's list of clusters," which I'm sure we'll discuss, right?
Hmm.
And only one responded, and he's denied any knowledge of these people or this group. Whether I believe him or not, it's a separate issue. This is what he said, and so I've got that full quote. So when I refer to him in an upcoming article, I will say this, that this is.
Yeah, that he denied it.
Yeah, and I'm prepared to believe that that he hadn't heard of these people. Maybe he went to an event that they took his name down. That being said, he's absolutely ideologically aligned with their objectives. I know because I read his stuff. He's a journalist with the Times. His name is David Aronovich, and he's as a journalist as part of a journalist working with the Integrity Initiative. So
Yeah, and it would be very easy to get someone involved in something like that unknowingly now because there's so much freelance journalism going on too.
But
So
that's the point, by the way, of this. So we'll get into this of how this thing works. That's the whole point: is to develop. Should I discuss this? Should we get into this? The clusters and all that.
yeah, no, let's just do the timeline real quick, and then
Okay. Yeah.
we'll run off into that too. So just want to establish some information about how this all started and the sources and the organizations involved. So yeah, so November 5th, the documents were published. Later in November, they're discovered, and during this period of time, Anonymous Europe is. They say that they're going to release more every week until their demands are met. Is that kind of how it worked out?
Yeah, so every now and then, or it's every week or every 2 weeks, but like if our demands of transparency about the nature of this organization is not met, then we will release further documentation that will expose X, Y, and Z. Which, even from a newspaper perspective, it makes sense. I used to think that you want everything published at the same time, but actually things don't work that way, whether you're news or whether you're Snowden or what have you. It makes sense to tease information out because human beings can only absorb so much in a single instance. So
Yeah, and you can keep it going for longer.
want to keep it
Your
a story.
yeah, and your organization might, there's work involved in going through these things and publishing them.
Or it
So
takes hours. I've written something that was like literally, it's like practically a dissertation, and I didn't want it to be this long. And poor Max has got to go through it and like chop it up and separate it into different articles. So, so that's the first part that's come out. It's just he said, doesn't matter. Don't worry about the length. I was like, oh, how long do you want this thing? He said, don't worry about the length. I'll deal with it. And then he gets something that's like 8,000 words. So it's
Yeah, he's a machine, Max.
Yeah.
He does so much work. It's amazing. Both of you here. So anyway, that's the basis of this. And the thing that really escalates it is that we find that one of the operations that this organization is doing is, I think this is what really blew it up in the public, is sort of anti-Jeremy Corbyn information. And that's really, I think, what brought it, why it exploded into the public sphere.
Yes. So there's two main things that were easy enough for certain people to pick up on, right? And certain members of parliament to pick up on, because they are significant, despite how some journalists like Edward Lucas, who is connected to these people, would like to downplay what's going on. So the one part is the attack on the left, right? So everything is justified through the lens of countering Russian disinformation, right? That is the purpose of the Integrity Initiative. We exist to counter malign Russian influence and disinformation. That's like almost a verbatim quote.
Right, and the groundwork for that has been laid for years now.
Right, exactly. And so two of the things that you see, they've got a Twitter, and one of the documents I read, they said we now have a dedicated Twitter, a social media person, right? Social media is very important, right? And if you see lots of the names and related people, they're all intermingling with other people at conferences and events, included sponsored by NATO, right, the military alliance, about public media engagement. I'll send you the links. They've been going on since 2014 or 2015, and I've sent it to Max, so we'll probably be referring to it in future pieces, about how we need to be better at getting our message open. And it's all kinds of different groups who are there, who are including all kinds of military branches of this military, this Ministry of Defense and NATO and what have you, with consultants from the private sphere talking about how best to use social media, how best to use Facebook, how to frame things, how to personalize things, the language, all the kinds of things, the sociology and the psychology behind things, so as best to, you can imagine events like this for like products, for Tesco's, or for like, how best to get your product out there. It's like that. Many of their clients will be private sector, goods and services clients. And it's about bringing all these skills and expertise together in these NATO events. And you can see that these people are also connected to the Integrity Initiative by one degree of separation, say, and the Institute for Statecraft. And it's like, okay, how can we best use this to get out our message? So it's not that social media isn't a sideshow for them. They want it to be an ever-increasing part. You can see it, right? This is escalating. An ever-increasing part of what we do is how best to use, to manipulate, to make use of the main sources of communication and of opinion influencing, right? Of narrative control and narrative influencing, which is social media, right? And so it's not a side issue. So then you take that, and then you look at these two main issues that I had mentioned, or two main activities that were picked up on by members of parliament when other people had pushed it to them, like journalists and other people working behind the scenes. I said, are you aware? And one of them is a set of documents belonging to the Integrity Initiative, which refer to a campaign against the appointment of a particular Spanish person to the head of their Homeland Security, right? So it's not called Homeland Security, but if you like, their National Security Department, right? They're like, look, we call this the Moncloa campaign, right? And Moncloa is the name of the palace where the Prime Minister of Spain lives in, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a new socialist, he's the member of the Socialist Party, but they're like, that's what it's called. We can debate how socialist they really are. Think of them as the center-left party of Spain, mm-hmm. right? We can debate. His cabinet is, you could call it, more kind of right-wing, etc. But fine. He's the head of the Socialist Party. He came in June this year when the right-wing party was ousted in a no-confidence vote by Parliament. And so he's making up his cabinet, and he's trying to appoint this guy who's a lifelong military man in Spain, and has worked on counterintelligence and terrorism matters for the European Union, and he's got a long brief. He's got a long establishment military brief. I've recently emailed him, and he's confirmed to me that he's still a full-time member of the Spanish military. He's on reserve, which means they pay him full-time so that at any point in time, if they want him, they can grab him. So he's got his credentials. But he has made some statements saying we shouldn't be confronting Russia overly aggressively, and the Russians have their genuine interests the way that we or the Americans or the Chinese have their interests. And this appears to have been enough to trigger an action to target his appointment. So I'll pause on that for a moment, put a pin into that. The other thing has been articles and tweets that have been critical or very critical of the left. And the left in Europe, we're talking about, as well as the leader of the opposition in the UK, which is Jeremy Corbyn, is the head of the Labour Party. And what happens is they'll be clever. What they'll do is they'll tweet out quotes from articles that other people have written, including in center-left kind of publications. I say center-left, they're not left. Like the New Statesman, right? The New Statesman is like a neoliberal, it wasn't always, but it's a neoliberal paper, now a magazine, online and paper magazine, and The Guardian as well is a neoliberal newspaper. They've got left-wingers who they'll pay to write for them, but it is not a left wing anymore. It used to be, but it's not really a left wing. It's not like capitalism is the problem, right? If you're not saying that capitalism is the problem, then you can't claim to be on the left, right? You're a liberal of some variation. You could be the left side of liberal, but if you're not putting the economic system, the social, political, and economic system front and center as being the key issue, then you can't, as far as we're concerned, right? In the mainstream left, fine, yes. So that's what they'll do. They'll quote things that other people have said. That, Putin's useful idiot, so-and-so said of Jeremy Corbyn. And they're tweeting this out. And people don't know at the time when these things are being tweeted out, right, that this is an organization funded by the British, the equivalent of the State Department, right, the British Foreign Office. And unlike the State Department, which the Foreign Office doesn't just cover public diplomacy, as you mentioned, and as I put in our article, the Foreign Office also oversees our NSA and MI6, our CIA, unlike in the United States, where the CIA is a separate institution that is ostensibly, responsible for, responsibility lies with the president ultimately, right? They're supposed to report to the president, if you like.
Yeah, all the way to the top. And they're supposed to be outward directed. They're supposed to be directed only at foreign issues.
Same here. In fact, the CIA was modeled off of MI6, right? Because remember, Britain was a global empire before the United States, right? The United States has always been an imperialist force, right? Invading the Philippines and colonizing Mexico, like loads of Mexico that make up now more of the U.S. and Hawaii, right? They didn't go willingly into that was occupied, right? And colonized, and then eventually became one of the 50th state or 49th, I can't remember, it was Alaska or Hawaii first. But never at the level of, just because you had Britain and you had Spain. And so when America's modern imperial project was being designed, and also you have World War I and World War II, and that's the key, right? The British are in there helping them. They're saying, this is how we do things, right? And
exactly.
And so this is how we do X, Y, and Z. And so but it's always a back and forth, right? The Americans now do that a lot here, right? Lots of people don't realize the extent to which Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Britain, and the United States are part of this intermixing more than any other group, including other countries in Europe.
The coalition empire, if you will.
Yeah, well, the Five Eyes, you have a surveillance network called the Five Eyes, right? Who are the Five Eyes? All the original Anglo-Saxon colonial states, right? Britain, the United States, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. And those are the Five Eyes. That's the Five Eyes network. And sometimes you'll see documentation with the words FO. No FO means no foreign, which means just for the eyes of Americans. And sometimes you'll see 5 for Five Eyes, and then sometimes you'll see plus NATO, plus. But there are documents which are meant to be classified just for the Five Eyes, no one else. Not French, not German, not Spaniards, they're not to see them, right? So there's, coalitions within coalitions within coalitions, right? That are there.
And is this operation also... is that a better description of the scope of this operation? Because here it says that, I'm quoting one of your articles, Britain has in fact created a large-scale information secret service in Europe, the United States, and Canada, which consists of representatives of political, military, academic, and journalistic communities, with a think tank in London at the head of it.
That's from me, or is that from the Guerrilla?
Oh, sorry. Yes, that is. Sorry, that's from the Guerrilla website, Cyber Guerrilla website. That's how they succinctly described it.
Exactly. So that's how they describe it. I would kind of similarly. I didn't say Secret Service. We didn't define it like that. But yeah, we said there's a. It's like an attempt almost at Operation Mockingbird, although a newer, almost outsourced version. If you know Operation Mockingbird briefly, that was a project, or that's the name that we give, right, to a project of the CIA infiltrating the U.S. media and other international media, and that was exposed in the 1970s. And I linked to it, and I referred to it in our Max Blumenthal piece. And you had Senate hearings, right, where the head of the CIA is giving at least partially true information to the Church Committee, or the Pike Committee, actually named after Senator Pike. And I linked to it, and I had more links. I don't know if he kept them into the article. I can send them over for your show notes. Yeah, we do have it, where I say, I'll just quote this thing, yeah. The entire extremely shady enterprise, as Miller explained, that's David Miller, a professor that we interview on this, because he's been really at the forefront of going through these documents as well, is an elaborate front for the British military intelligence apparatus. Its covert coordination with friendly politicians and mainstream journalists recalls the Cold War-era intrigue known as Operation Mockingbird, and then there's a link there. And you click on the link, you can listen to testimony and all the rest of it. And then there's a further link to Carl Bernstein's article, possibly the last great article he ever wrote, which is in 1977, right? Which is a 25,000-word piece. And it's all about how, quote, the scandal involved the unmasking of more than 400 American journalists who in the past 25 years have secretly carried out assignments for the Central Intelligence Agency, end quote. And so that means you have people working, in all, in small places and bigger places, as direct employees of the CIA, as people who are just assets, right? People who are paid informants, etc. So this has not reached that scale, right? Nor is there a conclusive proof, in my opinion, and I could be wrong, and I'll happily be wrong if there's evidence of that. Nor is there conclusive proof of this being directly operated out of MI6, the way the CIA ran Operation Mockingbird. This is more of like an outsourced kind of thing, where a group of people who have a background in military intelligence in Britain and other military backgrounds and backgrounds from the Foreign Office, working at the FCO, and backgrounds of working in the Ministry of Defense, right? So Army, Ministry of Defense, Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and military intelligence people who were reservists as well as people who were full-time, who've basically formed this group of people and who are getting government funds to carry out operations further to what they say in their proposal forms, that this is what we'll do. And it's all about countering Russian malign influence. And then we bring this back to Jeremy Corbyn, because it's like, well, they'll say it's all tangential, the way the CIA head Colby said during the Senate hearings. All of our stuff is external. It's not internal to the United States. That's what they'll say here as well. All of our stuff is external. It's not internal to Britain, right? Anything that happens to touch upon things internal to Britain, yes, we prefer that not to be the case, but that is collateral to our main objective, which is to counter Russian malign influence. But here's the thing. As I point out in the article, okay, the funding was under the Russian Linguistic Strategic Department or something like that out of the Foreign Office. That was the name of it was something like that, the name of the group that they apply for funding for. Yeah? But none of these documents and their reports and their articles and the things that they're doing are in Russian. Right? These are all that we see and that I've seen from their website. So both the leaked, hacked stuff as well as the non-leaked, hacked stuff, the stuff that is published on the website, is all in English, right? And it's not like on their website they make it very clear, we are funded by NATO, the Foreign Office, the U.S. State Department, Facebook, etc. They don't say this, making it clear. That's what makes it grey propaganda. If it was white propaganda, then you know the source. And you're like, okay, I'm being told A, B, and C from an organization that's funded by A, B, and C. You don't know that. You have to go hunting for that, or you have to see these leaked documents for that.
Right. In the statement that they issued on November 26th, they say, The Integrity Initiative is a partnership of several independent institutions led by the Institute for Statecraft,
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
all already a sort of a spooky sounding name.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and it's because the people who founded it, Chris Donnelly and Dan Lafayette, both have military backgrounds. Chris Donnelly he's an honorary colonel in SGMI, which is Specialist Group Military Intelligence, right? Who are based out of Denison Barracks in an area called Hermitage, which is just to the west of London. And that will be useful later because other people are also based out of that same barracks, a PSYOP group, right? So, so these people are co-founders and co-directors of the Institute of Statecraft. They're also involved in other organizations as well, which are funded by the Home Office. They have years under their belt of teaching at like equivalent of like West Point, right? Sandhurst related things, the UK Defence Academy. They're not nobodies, and they've got backgrounds in Chris Donnelly and Russia studies and Soviet Union and what have you. Although I'm not necessarily always impressed with his kind of analysis of things when I read his papers. You think some people can be a bit more two-sided, right? They're not really two-sided. They don't. It's as one person put it, it's all like a one-eyed view of the world.
Do any of them go back to the Cold War era that, they're sort of resurrecting their expertise from the Cold War?
It all felt, well, the language is all very Cold War-ish. Lots of these people are in their, 60s or 70s. So lots of the people, they're not young. Many of the people who are like at the core of founding this organization, they've been around the block for like 40 years or what have you. So they were there before the fall of the Berlin Wall. Right? So, and they really do have, lots of it feels super McCarthyistic. Like when you're reading like, almost cartoonish in terms of the language that is used of, we are defending democracy and liberty from the destabilizing hybrid warfare of the malign anti-democratic dictatorial tendencies of our adversaries. And this isn't a fun proposal.
Maintaining the liberal world order based on our values.
But they'll say they'll say things of like the international rules-based order, or rules-based international order, which comes from the UN, right? You'll see this thing called international rules-based order, right? And they're all about how, and I've had friends of mine who are in the military who've used this terminology, and I can tell, I don't say this to their face because it's like they'll start arguments, but you can tell how it's like, listen, do you realize that the use of this terminology is coming literally from American think tanks and neocon groups that are finding their way in, because conferences are happening all the time and briefs that will just kind of make its way over here, and then people will start using language here, like collateral damage, which I think came out of the Johnson administration, so they wouldn't say civilian casualties. Things like that, right? Where you have these terminologies that make it's about legitimacy. Right? You're trying to say, like, look, we're legitimate because we follow this international rules-based order. We have the rule of law. We have democracy and liberal democracy. They don't have these things, and they see these things as their enemy, which is, quite frankly, it's not. I personally don't see that. I think they're more than happy to work along with Western capitalist states. They've been doing it. They are themselves capitalist states. It's just you have this paranoia about the fact that they feel that America and quote-unquote the West are losing their influence, which to a certain extent is true, right? It's certainly not, China is a rising power, but it's not like China has 800 to 1,000 military bases around the world the way the U.S. does.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's all coded wording for a decline of the empire. That's really what it's asking.
And it's absolutely this. But they still don't, because I do speak to people and you read the stuff and it's still, they don't, there is this thing of like, they are bad, we are good, they are trying to undermine us and we need to step up our game, right? That is like runs throughout everything. Yeah. And so when I speak to people, and you can tell that it's like practically everyone will be hearing this now. So when you speak to people, you realize how many, there are charts now I'm having to draw, right? I'm going to figure out how to put this online of like, who has met who and who has been to which conference with whom, and just so that you can see the intoxicating effect of this, of like, just like we would be doing it, say, on the left, right? Of like, we met with these people and this union will host this event and, this anti-war group will meet this local kind of business group in terms of people having like local business control to have our co-ops and stuff, and that's what they're doing all the time, right?
Right, but now it's a network of networks. They said, but now
Yes.
in the age of the internet, it's on steroids. It's not like we've never seen anything like this before, but with social media and the internet, it's like it's on steroids, if you will.
Absolutely, and their objective, right? Just to tie off the. So because of the attacks on the left and on Jeremy Corbyn, whether it's direct or indirect by quoting other people, right, as well as the Moncloa campaign, which I didn't mention, by the way, was successful, right, or they certainly claim success for it, right? So you have the Spanish Prime Minister is saying, okay, it looks like Pedro Baños, right, Colonel Pedro Baños, who's got this military career that I briefly described, he's going to be appointed the head of national security department in Spain, and then within 24 hours, it doesn't happen. Within 24 hours, he doesn't get the appointment when it looks like he's going to be appointed. And what do we know?
Who made that decision? Who were they trying?
Ultimately, it's up to the Spanish Prime Minister, right? Because the Prime Minister makes the appointment, which I think makes sense why it's called the Moncloa campaign, right? Because the Spanish Prime Minister lives in the palace in Moncloa Palace, right? So, and if you look at their documents in the Moncloa campaign, it's like, look at these tweets, look at these articles, these links. This person had 100,000 retweets, and what? So let me then just describe the network so people can understand them.
I guess what I was trying to understand there was who was their target.
So it depends on how you look at it. I think the ultimate target is so the target, if you like, is the president in order to get him not to appoint this guy who has made these comments, this colonel, Pedro Baños, who's made these comments saying, we shouldn't be seeking confrontation with Russia. Right? I mean, it's not like he said Putin's the greatest guy in the world. Right. That's what he said, right? Now, I haven't seen any other documentation, and maybe there is, but any other documentation that shows him as being somehow, like, in the pay of the Russians or anything like that. It's more like we shouldn't be seeking confrontation with Russia. We should have a realistic worldview that understands that the Russian state, whatever we may think about its behavior domestically or what have you, has its own interests, its genuine, legitimate interests, the way the U.S. does, the way China does, right? That's a near quote. That's a quote I saw of his, right? And so he wasn't appointed. I emailed him, and he got back to me. He said, for now, I won't be discussing this. He clarified some stuff to me about his military career, and then when I asked him, I said, do you have any comments about what happened with the Integrity Initiative? He's like, not now, but thank you. And considering the fact that he's still serving as a member of the military, then that makes sense. He's a colonel in the army and the infantry, as he said it. So it makes sense that he wouldn't be commenting, because there may very well be rules about making, political interventions, if you like, of even though he didn't get appointed because of this.
I find it interesting that they use this method to, if we're talking about high-level government, why didn't they just sort of, behind closed doors, deal with the Spanish government and try to, thwart this appointment?
That's the exact point that I made to somebody, which is that reflects the fact that you want to be able to, well, bear this in mind. We don't even know, and it could be the case, but we don't even know if there's anybody high level in the British government that made this decision, right? So if you look at the documents in the Integrity Initiative, the whole point of cutaways and outsourced and private companies is that you're funding these people because you agree with their ideological worldview and what they say they're going to do. So you give them their money, and then they go off and they do whatever it is they're going to do. You know what I mean? That's it. Like, there may very well be direct links with serving members of either the permanent state, right? So MI6, if you like, as part of that, right? The people who are there, irrespective of who's elected, they're civil servants, right? Or with political appointments, like the foreign minister. But I personally, I wouldn't be surprised at all if the foreign minister wasn't aware at all of this campaign. It's a massive department. They've got loads of obligations. There's loads of things going on. Okay, who are these people? They're applying for money for this. Okay, here we go. Boom, money. And every now and then they may have discussions with them. Some of the documents say we want to discuss with you once a month. from the Institute of Statecraft say this, the Integrity Initiative, in their proposals for funding, saying we'd like to meet with you, as in whoever at the Foreign Office, once a month. But I think the whole idea of this is that they create a network, and it's a network of networks because it's a network of professionals who are journalists, politicians, researchers, think tank people, opinion makers, military or ex-military people, National Health Service. I saw one group, right? And what happens is this group will be called a cluster. They call it a cluster. And so you have a UK cluster, and then you have a Spanish cluster, and then you have a Greek cluster. And the idea is to build up these clusters. And the idea beyond that is to say, give us the funding, the seed money for this. We also get co-funding, right, from NATO and from the Americans. We got a bit from their State Department and what have you. And then eventually we will be independent acting. So you'll get, it's like investors, we'll get a bit of a loan from you, but it's not a loan, it's a grant. We'll do what we're going to do. And then eventually we may not need any money from you, which would be perfect because now the connection between government, certainly the British government, say, or possibly the American government, and these people would no longer exist. No, you know what I mean? Because it's like, that's it. We now get funding from other groups and other think tanks and other foundations and what have you. Because it's only been created over the last 2 years. And that's expressed, by the way, that's explicit in the funding proposal. I'm not interpreting. They say this. They say, the idea is that because the Foreign and Commonwealth Office form, because it's a form, it's an official form that they're filling out, says, how will you remain sustainable when funding ends? Right? So the idea is that there's certain types of projects that we will fund, but the idea is we don't want to fund it in perpetuity. So that makes it, perfect because it's like what you'll have is, it's like, well, fine, we have some connections to government because some people used to work in government, but we're a separate entity altogether, right?
They're more like NGOs here. Yeah.
Exactly. And it becomes, well, technically it is. Well, they're a registered charity. Right, they're registered with the Scottish Charity Office, and now there's an investigation by the Scottish Charity Commission. Right, right, their investigation with the Scottish Charity Commission, but that has been as a result of this coming into the news. Although, if you see their registered address, it's a semi-derelict barn. Someone went to, and they took pictures of it, and we took a screenshot of the picture they took, and we linked to their article, I think.
Yeah, I want to hear that part of your story too about the sleuthing that you did on the ground there.
Well, I didn't go to Scotland. I found their London address because there doesn't seem to be anything going on in their Scottish address. Although one thing I read in the Sky News report, they interviewed one guy who said that the co-founder, that this barn belongs to him, that he owns it, he owns his property. But why you would have that as being your registered address, which means that if post and stuff is being sent from the Charity Commission, or if people see that address and send you a letter, you're never going to get it, are you? Like, it's off in Scotland. You're based in London, right? And it doesn't look like there's anybody there. It's like falling apart, the place. So that's
I don't know.
Interesting.
You might have somebody in the post office that knows where to send it, but yeah.
Or you redirect the post. That's a good point. You can pay money to the post office, where it's just registered with the post office supposed to redirect any. Oh, that's a good point. I hadn't even thought of that. You pay it's like £100 or whatever it is per year.
Yeah, sure. And I mean. Also, the CIA here is known for having, front businesses, front operations, offices, and locations. So, they know how to do that kind of thing.
Yeah. Although it's not, like I said, it's like, I'm sure there are organizations which are much more difficult to find that are being operated out of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and what have you. You know what I mean? Like this one has a public face to it as well. There will be front groups which don't have a public face, which are just like, it's an organization that exists, but they're not tweeting out there and they're not publishing stuff.
Yeah,
I mean?
Of course.
They just exist to be a front for certain types of behavior that they don't want, they're deliberately not engaging openly with the public.
This is operating more like NGOs that we have in other countries.
We're a think tank. We're a research institute. We're there. You know what their tagline is defending democracy against disinformation. That's the tagline. On the documents, on their Twitter handle, on the Integrity Initiative webpage, right?
Yeah.
And so, as they see it, if we're countering Russia's malign influence and their hybrid warfare, then anybody who opposes our narrative, or who seems like they're not critical enough of Russia, or they don't see what we see, right, about Russia's malign influence, or then we'll go after them. But that's just part of our countering Russia's malign influence.
Just out of curiosity, have you found any links to German Marshall Fund or Proper Not or any of those Alliance for Securing Democracy or those other ones who target people?
Well, I haven't seen yet because of the part that I've been focusing on in the documents and the deep background that I've been focusing on. But there is links to the Atlantic Council, strong links, right, to the Atlantic Council. So this network of networks, these clusters, the U.S. cluster has people in it who are members of the Atlantic Council. You have this guy called Ben Nemo, who is a big person of the Atlantic Council, who has co-authored a report with a journalist here called Edward Lucas, who's also written things and published things for the Integrity Initiative and the Institute for Statecraft and other partner organizations. So I think there'll probably be one degree of separation. There's a group called the Smith-Richardson Foundation. Short version is the guy who became incredibly wealthy from VapoRub, the chest stuff, like 100 years ago. Right, and then eventually, I don't know if it was NyQuil as stuff as well comes from him, right? He set up this thing called his son set up the Smith-Richardson Foundation, which is meant to support individuals who may make it in this world, but they wouldn't make it if they don't have financial support. Your typical old school philanthropist of, the system is not the problem. We just need people. Some people need a helping hand. And then in the 1970s, his son turns it into we're going to support market fundamentalism, right? Neoclassical economics, which is public is always bad, private is always good. Competition.
And the Atlantic,
and so they're linked with. Oh,
the
sorry.
Atlantic. Sorry.
I was just
interrupt for a second.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
No, go ahead. Finish what you were saying.
So that guy who said this is the direction it's going to take is good friends with Irving Kristol, who is like the doyen, one of the original neoconservatives, and they fund all kinds of neoconservative projects as well as all kinds of neocon think tanks, and as well as conservative and reactionary think tanks. It's like a who's who. If you look at their funding list of who they give money to, they've also given link to two Democratic Party linked groups, which is the Center for American Progress and Center for New American Security, I think, as well. So I list them. Some of the ones that they've been given funding to, just so you can see who. Let me just get the article. So anyway, the point is they've given some money to this Integrity Institute. Now, just to be clear, the vast majority of the budget of the Institute for Statecraft seems to be the Integrity Initiative funding, right? Because they have other projects, and the vast majority of that funding comes from the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Right, and then they have from NATO, and then they have members of the German business community. It says, that's all it says. So some German businessmen, and then the U.S. State Department, a branch of it, which is for countering propaganda, the Global Engagement Center, set up under Obama, and then the Smith-Richardson Foundation. But it is important. I think it is indicative of these people's worldview that they would even seek funding from the Smith-Richardson Foundation. Right, if I'm setting up a group of people, and I'm thinking, who could we seek funding from? That might be sort of left of center foundation that might be willing, because there are foundations that are willing to give sometimes even to proper left organizations, even if the founders weren't really left wing, they're more liberal, like Soros, right? Soros, who's like a liberal, has given money. He's got foundations which do give money to good people who do good work on the actual left, even though Soros is not on the left, he's liberal. Right? He's not anti-capitalist. He is a capitalist. Right? So, what organization I would never have sought funding for would be the Smith-Richardson Foundation. If you just look at who they're linked to, who they give money to, what they say they're about, because it's they'd never give us money. They're not, they're market fundamentalists. They don't support a national health service, and that's who these guys seek money from. And they have links with all kinds of other such market fundamentalist groups, the Legitim Institute and others, who are all, everything should be privatized, and the state should exist to guarantee the rules of contract and private enterprise, right?
Well, we also, the Atlantic Council, I think a lot of the funding for that is the war profiteers, right? The arms manufacturers. So I can see a link if you...
The Atlantic Council is NATO's think tank, right? Of unofficial, but NATO's think tank. That's basically the Atlantic Council, right? Yeah, and you have people who are in the American cluster who are members of the Atlantic Council, including Ben Nemo, I think. Yeah. You want to hear some of these other places they fund? The Smith Richardson Foundation, which has given money to the Integrity Institute, the American Enterprise Institute, right? You know them. The Hudson Institute, the Institute for the Study of War, which is founded by one of the Kagans, right, of the Kagan family, which is like neocon par excellence family.
Yes.
Freedom House, right? Freedom House, the Hoover Institution, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and then the democratically aligned ones are the Center for New American Security and Center for American Progress, which I think Neera Tanden was, I don't know if she still is, head of the Center for American Progress, who do some good work, of course, some good research, but of course it's democratically party aligned, so it also means they do some terrible stuff. Like she did a whole interview with Benjamin Netanyahu once as the head of Center for American Progress. I was like, how's this a progressive group? And it was all softball questions. It wasn't like, what's up with your like incredibly racist right-wing political party that you head? You know, you would think you'd ask these questions if you're inviting, right? If you are a progressive group, and he's the head of the right-wing political party there, and he's overtly racist individual.
That's an infamous interview. She giggled all through it, and it was hard to watch.
Yeah.
But
they've taken money from the Smith Richardson Foundation, which is interesting. So it's so anyway, so that is the kind of milieu that they're in, and the whole idea is to have each cluster will work independently as well as in cooperation with the other clusters, and this sort of, I don't want to say they're in their infancy, because look, we've already done this Moncloa campaign, right, which appears to have been a successful, which is how do we marshal social media, right, as well as other forms of medium, of course, the traditional television and newspaper. But lots of it is like, look, this is where lots of people are getting their opinion. We need to be able to have, basically, it is propaganda in the literal sense of the term, right? Influence, persuade people. How do you persuade people to have your worldview? But you need to have this cutaway, because if I hear that somebody who's speaking to me is funded by NATO, I might have a different view than if I hear this journalist publishing in this independent paper and this journalist who's saying this and this. There is power in numbers. It's like, well, so many different people are saying similar things on this subject. There must be at least some truth to it. And maybe there is, and maybe there isn't, and maybe it's overblown, and maybe it's not. But what you don't realize is that they're all part of this cluster, which is funded and gets seed money and all this money right now from these major, establishment, military institutions and spy and surveillance institutions. And if you hear that, you'll think more skeptical, won't you? You'll be like, oh, so this is just a group of people. Maybe what you're saying is true, but be more transparent about what you're about. It's all about lack of transparency. That's why it's done this way.
We should mention that, like, let's take the American Enterprise Institute. I mean, they have a problem. They have a big problem, not just here, all over the world. I mean, they were one of the main drivers of the invasion of Iraq, and they're completely discredited. And now they sort of went quiet for a little while, but they're back. I mean, they're completely back. So they need to mask themselves.
Yeah. Well, just like the Project for a New American Century, right? They're now defunct, and they've just went on to form other names with other, but it's with the same objectives, which is the New America Foundation, or the New Center for New Security. I don't know. There's so many different ones. I don't want to get the name wrong. But the guy Robbie Martin. Robbie Williams is the singer. Robbie Martin, which is Abby Martin's brother, Abby Martin of the Empire Files. So I've been communicating with him for the past couple of years now, and he's done an excellent tripartite documentary called A Very Heavy Agenda, which is very long. Part 1 is an hour or so, but part 2 is longer, part 3 is even longer, but it's absolutely worth watching.
Actually, the music from this podcast is from A Very Heavy Agenda. Yeah.
Okay, there. Oh, yeah, it does, doesn't it? Yeah, I recognize it. And that's his music, right? Because he's also an artist.
He was kind enough to allow us to use that music, yes.
Yeah, and it is very good, where you just see, there's a montage scene, which is absolutely brilliant, where it's there's no narration, there's nothing. It's just, you're just going through various clips of various people saying things on different news broadcasts. But because of the way he's put it all together, you can see the kind of shifts from the war on terror, it's extremist Islam, towards Russia, right? And the fact that you can see this is all still under the Obama administration, when he was assuming that Clinton was going to be elected, because we were all assuming this. I don't know about you, but I and he were, that Clinton had it in the bag. Even though I knew that the voting machines, lots of the software is all run by like right-wing Christian theocrats. I don't know if you know this. Lots of the voting machines and the software behind the voting machine is owned by these American plutocratic families who are like hardcore. America should be like like Iran, or more like Saudi Arabia, but Christian kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
So it's not like liberals owning it. It's certainly not the Russians, right?
Right.
So that's an aside. But yeah, these groups, it does, and it's not bear in mind, it's not the Americans who are setting this up. These are Brits who are setting this up, and they're finding alliances with their friends and their colleagues and potential colleagues wherever they can find them. And so yeah, this is a good way to have people who are doing work that is not directly out of some of the old names that people will raise an eyebrow to when they're like, oh gosh, them, and at the end of the day, whereas people like you and I have to go like find money wherever we can find it, but in smaller amounts, right? They get things like, the budget, the money they got last time around from the Foreign Office, it's like £2 million just in one group. It's public money, right? Out of a budget of apparently 100 million that they have available over the next 10 years to fund such projects. So that's just that. God knows who else they're funding out of this pot of 100 million. This is just a tiny, we're only seeing one bit of the picture here. We're seeing this group of people. There could be a completely different group of people engaged in all kinds of other things. In fact, there definitely are people both working for the military as well as civilian contractors. Of like, hey, I used to work, I've got these skills. I see there's a pot of money over there. Let me, it's like Blackwater, right? Blackwater does its own thing, right? They do their own thing. They work for other governments and they have their own operations, but they also do work for the U.S. government.
Yeah,
right?
I'm pretty sure that there's money coming from, a lot of other places. I actually thought that 2.2 million pounds was smaller than I expected it to be, because, the whole operation or the group of people behind this seem to be the same people who are always selling wars here. And that's a massive network of people.
But they're not, remember, Britain, everything is cheaper for Britain, right? So the United States, Britain is what, a $1.5 trillion economy. The United States is what, like 10 trillion? Like, you know what I mean? So perhaps you're also seeing it from like American numbers, right? Here, this is also the age of austerity, right? So it's like their first time round, they asked for like 500,000, right, in their first application form, and they got like 200 or something. So from 200 to 300,000 pounds to 2 million the next year, that's not bad of a jump, is it? Right? So if you think about that, they went from like 500,000 to 2 million. And also that's why they're getting money and support from NATO. And they're also getting money and support from the Smith Richardson Foundation. They're also getting money, $100,000 from Facebook. And they're also getting money from other, bear in mind, it's the same people who work largely for the Institute for Statecraft. So if it's all in the same building, it's all the same rent, right? And if you're also being funded by the Ministry of Defense for this separate project, right, and the British Army is giving you funds for this other thing, and it all collects up together, right? Chris Donnelly is the highest paid that I saw from one of the leaked documents. It's like £8,100 a month just for the Integrity Initiative.
And that's the end of part 1 of this 2-part series. Thank you for listening. Special thanks to Mohamed Elmaazi. Follow Mohamed on Twitter at Elmaazi, Melmaazi. Find his work at The Canary and The Grey Zone. The Around the Empire podcast is independent media, brought to you with the help of our donors. You can pitch in at patreon.com/aroundtheempire or by doing a one-time donation on our website, aroundtheempire.com. Follow us on Twitter at Around the Empire. The syndicated audio podcast is the main focus of Around the Empire and where we have the most traffic. I'd like to add some video and live stream content in the new year. Please help us do that by hitting the subscribe button on our YouTube channel. That's free. So we can gather enough subscribers for revenue there. Also, use the thumbs up to like the individual videos. Subscribe to the audio podcast on your preferred podcast app. We're on most of them: iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Music, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and others. If you like the podcast, take a minute, leave a nice review. It helps. Here's a Happy New Year's toast to a more just and peaceful 2019. Take care, everyone.